Small business is big business. The sponsor of today's episode, Busey Bank, understands that small businesses are the lifeblood of our economy. For more than 150 years, Busey has remained a dedicated partner to those businesses and entrepreneurs who bring vibrancy to the local community. Through sound advice and simplified solutions, Busey proudly supports small businesses. For an array of business solutions tailored to your specific needs, visit busey.com, busey.com. And if you're seeking a business acquisition loan, be sure to reach out to the head of their SBA group, Steve Lazowitz. Steve's somebody I've known for almost 15 years. He's one of the best SBA bankers out there, bar none. And you can reach Steve at steve.lazowitz@busey.com. That's Steve, S-T-E-V-E, .Lazowitz, L-A-S-I-E-W-I-C-Z @busey.com.
Looking to buy, sell, or grow your business to position it for a sale? As the owner and managing partner of Sun Acquisitions, Dominic Rinaldi has personally been involved in over 300 M&A transactions. He has seen and done it all, consulting with large and small businesses across a broad range of industries. On M&A Unplugged, he'll interview buyers, sellers, and their advisors about their experiences scaling, selling, and acquiring businesses. On every episode, you will get key learnings, but most importantly, you will be better prepared for your own acquisition or sale. This is M&A Unplugged with your host, Dominic Rinaldi.
M&A Unplugged community, who doesn't like an M&A transaction with a great outcome? Well, that's exactly what today's episode is all about. I have with me Phil Stout, the owner of Sizzle Productions. Phil, along with his wife Ashley, acquired a home staging business. And in an interesting twist of fate, Phil and Ashley acquired this business from another husband and wife team who had started the business at about the same ages that Phil and Ashley are today. Our firm represented the sellers in this transaction, and I know how excited the owners were to sell to Phil and Ashley. I should also point out that you and Ashley left substantial careers to buy and operate a business, and I'm so excited to have you share your journey with our community. So Phil, let's start there. Can you talk a little bit about your background and the careers you and Ashley left behind to acquire Sizzle? And welcome to the show.
Sure. Thanks, Dominic, and thanks for having me. Yeah, so Ashley was an HR professional. She had her master's in HR, had been working in various manufacturing facilities over a period of about 10 years or so. And then myself had been an engineer, transitioned into management consultant with an MBA, and was working with one of the large 4 consulting firms doing mergers and acquisitions consulting, actually. So it got to a point where Ashley and I had one daughter and another on the way, and I was on the road 5 days a week. And we said we needed to do something different and something that gave us a little bit more flexibility and potentially more upside. And so we started looking at buying a small business, and that's kind of what kicked everything into motion.
So I'm curious, your mergers and acquisitions experience, did that sort of give you the bug to go out and do this on your own, or had you always had the desire to own your own business?
I'd say 50-50 there, right? So I come from a family where my father, his brother, my aunts and uncles on both sides all have their own businesses. Ashley's family is very much the same way. So entrepreneurial blood, right? But then within the M&A practice that I was in, I worked for a number of different clients. Sometimes, just in like in any job, right? Sometimes you've got clients that are appreciative of the work you do, and you have others that are maybe a little bit less. And in those cases where I had the ones that were maybe a little bit less, I was thinking to myself, well, why am I doing this for you when I could be doing it for myself? And so that's where I got another part of the itch, really, to go out and look for a small business and to do my own merger and acquisition.
So how long are you into this now, owning the business?
So we are, I believe, about 11 months now. So we're coming up on a year.
And what's the early feedback? Happy you did it? Scared? Things haven't gone exactly the way you had hoped? What's the early returns here?
Very happy we did it. I mean, it's the amount of flexibility I've got from a professional standpoint is fantastic. from a family perspective as well, which was important to Ashley and me when we were looking at buying a business. I mean, part of it, like I said, was initially upfront. We were looking to do something that was potentially more upside from a return on investment standpoint, but we were also to an extent looking for a lifestyle, one where I wouldn't be on the road as much, be able to spend more time with family, and we'd be all just together more. And, I think through and through, we're seeing this, we're hitting all the check marks on these items, and we don't regret and haven't looked back at all.
That's great. Congratulations. That's awesome to hear. So let's talk a little bit about the company you acquired. Talk a little bit about Sizzle and what it does and how the business is doing. And then we'll move over to the process that you and Ashley went through to, really plan for and then ultimately execute on the acquisition.
Sure. So Sizzle Productions is a home staging business. We work throughout the greater Chicagoland area. We stage close to about 400 properties a year. And that's the same as what the previous owners were doing. We can kind of talk about what our objectives were maybe a little bit later as to when we took over the business and what we were hoping to do in the first year. But Sizzle does about 400 stagings a year. We have a crew that will do the installs, the de-stagings. We've got our own trucks. We come in, our own furniture. There's companies out there that will do the interior design, but they rent the furniture from other people, from other companies. And so ours is a one-stop shop. Ashley and myself, we play both the designer roles as well as obviously the owners operators of the business, and we oversee all of our installations. And so, in short, we're just a hustling group of people that are always on the move, always running around the city of Chicago. You'll find us on the north side in the morning, and then you'll find us in the western suburbs in the afternoon sometimes. So we're just all over the place.
So Phil, what made you and Ashley comfortable that you could operate this business? I mean, the design work, had either of you done that previously? What was the litmus test for you to know that, this is something you could do?
So that's a great question. And I almost kind of want to take that back one step as to when we were looking to buy a business, what were we looking for? Because we weren't necessarily looking for a home staging company. We were looking for a company that was going to meet a number of our criteria, right? So what the cash flows were for the business, what the hours might be like for the business, the seasonality of it, the size and the scale of it. So something that we'd be comfortable taking over, but would also yield the right amount of return for us. We had been looking at a number of businesses. I'd say at this point, when we started talking with the prior owners of Sizzle, we had probably spoken with already 10 different business owners inquiring about their business. We had submitted a letter of intent on a separate business, and then Sizzle came up, and it was just, I looked at it. I saw we got it actually from an email from you guys saying, hey, here's one of our new listing from Sun Acquisitions. And I showed Ashley the email. I said, Ashley, we got to pursue this. We had, prior to owning the house that we're in right now, we had flipped 2 homes that we lived in ourselves. So we purchased, the first one was a foreclosure. We had flipped it ourselves. I slept on a tarp for a month. We ate out of cooler for about a month, as well as we waited for appliances to come in. So we had this kind of background in it. On the weekends, we would go to open houses just for the heck of it. So we had a passion around real estate and design. And so when we saw this, we thought, okay, this is something that we could actually execute.
Wow. So in your general search, though, was real estate something that you had on your radar, or you were looking for different types of businesses and then this just sort of fell in your lap? And we kind of know that because we presented it to you, but had you been thinking about in your early criteria real estate?
Nothing, no, because I guess I didn't even think about the home staging market as really an option, and there's not a whole lot of home staging companies in the Chicagoland area either. So there just wasn't a lot of, I didn't see other opportunities out there until this one came about. What we were looking for were professional service companies or manufacturing companies. So that was kind of our narrow. I don't know if it's, I kind of sometimes liken it to people when they're buying a house. They say, I want to have a home with 3 beds and I want to have a big backyard. But then they come across a home that's got 2 beds and it's got just a humongous backyard. Now all of a sudden they make a concession, right? And we kind of had that same thing. Initially we said, we don't want to be busy in the summers. We want to be a little bit slower in the summers. Well, turns out the business we ended up buying is extremely busy in the summers, but that's fine because everything else about the business is so fantastic.
So Phil, let's go back a little bit. Let's wind back a little bit. When you and Ashley first decided that buying a business was, really a path you wanted to follow, what were the first couple of things that you did to start to prepare yourself for that eventuality?
So I had a book by Harvard Business Review that I used almost as my Bible through this. I believe it's titled How to Buy a Small Business. And it kind of was a step-by-step guide. So the first thing I did was I started a legal entity. I did that in February of last year. Started a legal entity. From there, I then made a website to to credentialize ourselves essentially, and then built out the resumes and kind of just built up this foundation that then we would be able to present to sellers or business owners and say, hey, look, like we're actually serious at pursuing this. And you can gather that from the website I've pulled together with all the information, my background on it, what our objectives are. You'll see that we have a legal entity set up and that we're sincere about moving forward here.
And did you seek out the advice of your family and friends who were business owners just to talk to them about, things that they thought would be important as you went down this path?
You'd think I would have. Ashley and I did not do that. No, no. we,
That's so
we
surprising. So is it just because you grew up around entrepreneurs, so you had a good sense for what it took?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I had a good sense for what it took. I mean, I did have people say, I think most apparent is Ashley and Ashley's parents, her mom and her dad, they work together, and we spend a lot of time over at their house for Sunday night dinners and throughout the week for other dinners. And so we've seen them, talk about shop over dinner. We see how busy they are. So I gathered from that husband-wife duo kind of what it might look like for us when we took over a business and we were a husband-wife duo ourselves. But I guess I didn't fully comprehend the amount of work that would be required behind it. I mean, it's definitely a lot, right? I mean, I don't think people appreciate the fact that you've got to do the AP, so accounts receivable, accounts payable. You're doing the sales, the marketing. You actually have to, in case of our business, you actually have to deliver the product. So it's a full-time gig, right? I mean, there's no person to fall back on. You can't say, hey, I'm going to defer this. Maybe Jane will pick it up, right? There is no Jane in this situation.
Correct. Yeah, correct. So talk about the husband and wife dynamic. What were the conversations like between you and Ashley when you were deciding you were going to go into business together? Were there ground rules that you set on, how you were going to work together? Or tell us a little bit about the thought process that the two of you went through.
Yeah, I mean, we set up initial rules saying, hey, we're going to try and talk about this as minimal as possible at home. Now, that's not always a successful rule. I mean, we talk about it quite a bit at home, but I think just generally, Ashley and I appreciate each other's strengths and our weaknesses. And that just kind of goes back to our just having a strong marriage where we respect each other's opinions. And so we kind of leverage that really for the most part for this business. So there hasn't been a huge fundamental change in the way we operate together. It's just we spend more time together now. And she has a background in HR and in operations. So she's worked with hourly employees when I hadn't done that. I had come from more of a corporate role where I was working with really executive C-suite individuals in my management consulting role versus what we're doing now. So I do more of the sales, marketing, client relations, where Ashley does more of the employee relations and the delivery of the services as well.
So good division of labor, not a lot of overlap, and allows you to both manage to your strengths.
Yeah, and that did take some sorting out initially, right? So I think for the first 3 months, there was times where we'd be bumping into each other and say, hey, hold off, this is my realm. I've got ownership of this. And that took a little bit of time to sort out. But now we're in a place where we've got that figured out and we have our own areas that we own.
Well, it sounds like you guys have great boundaries too around that you're able to say, hey, look, this is, I think, my area of expertise, and enough respect to say, yep, you got it. Go for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So let's go back to your criteria. You started to hit on that a little bit, but I really think in the planning stage, this is one area that people maybe don't give enough attention to. So let's talk about what your actual criteria were. What did you lay out? What were the things that were most important to you, and what were the things that you didn't want? Because sometimes that's just as important as knowing what you want.
Yeah, I mean, I think more than anything, we knew what we didn't want. And that's kind of where I started the process. So I said, I do not want to do anything with perishables. I do not want to be in a restaurant business. I don't want to be doing really anything with food related. I had initially said I don't want to do certain types of services, but we kind of pared back on that a little bit when we started to learn more about what those roles, what those jobs were. But when we looked at what we wanted, most importantly was cash flow. So it was very important to me that we had a business that had strong cash flow that would then be able to replace what Ashley and I both bring home at our current jobs, and also be able to service the debt that we are going to have on the business. Because we were fully intending on financing this business. We didn't know at the time how we would go about that, whether we'd be looking for potential investors through family and friends, or if we would be pursuing an SBA route, which we ultimately went. But it was cash flow, revenues, hours in the day, and just the general type of work that we'd be doing as well.
So when did you line up the financing? Did you get a pre-qualification before you started your search, or did you come to that later after you started to look at businesses and then uncover your lending options?
We did not have a pre-qualification early on, but we did start conversations with various lenders early on, just saying, hey, I'm reaching out. I'm trying to understand what types of options your bank has. This is what we're looking to do. We don't have an exact timeline as to when this is going to be occurring, but we expect it to occur within the next year. Are there things that we can do right now to get ahead of any paperwork, anything that you might need from us, so that once we do hit the ground, we can hit it running? And that was the conversation we had.
And did you find that the banks were helpful in not just giving you a heads up on documentation and things that you would need, but did they help you think through the process, the acquisition process?
So it's funny you say it. So Ashley often will say that the bank is our second line of defense in the diligence process. I mean, if you're pursuing an SBA, that bank is making you provide a very detailed business model to them that outlines the exact cash flows of the business, how you're going to service the debt, what your expected expenses are and revenue streams. You have to then talk to them in detail about each one of those line items. You have to show historical prior 2 years. We showed it month to month, and why you're going forecasting, why there was any variation off of that, and what was your logic behind that variation. There's a lot of thought put behind that financial model, and being able to understand that and explain it back to the bankers was really, I think, an important part of both just kind of determining what the right fit for us was with the business, and making sure that we got through diligence and understood really what the business was that we were taking on.
Yeah, it makes total sense. Lenders can be very helpful in that way, and I think your comment about the second line of defense is right on. So you mentioned earlier about the fact that you had seen almost a dozen businesses before you came across Sizzle. Let's talk a little bit about that. Maybe a little bit about what you learned in the process. How did that help inform you so that when you got to the Sizzle transaction, you really knew, wow, this is the one for us?
Yeah, so it was just kind of like, best way to describe it is like you're going on your first date, and then you go on your next date, and you just kind of learn how the dating game works to an extent, right? So in the first meetings, I learned really how to do my elevator pitch a little bit better. So that elevator pitch up front, when I'm coming to these business owners and I'm saying, hey, I'm interested in buying your business, I got to make sure I'm very succinct and credible the way I come across. And I think at the first couple conversations or few, I was probably missing the mark on that. And you can kind of tell right up front in that first 5 minutes that I've already lost them and they're no longer interested in that conversation. And then once we got past that, the tables turned a little bit. And now I'm looking at their businesses and I'm saying, is this something I'm really interested in? I've got their interest, but am I interested in them? There were businesses that I came across that had deep family ties. And so while it may be a man that was owning it, he had his nephew and his cousin in the business, and it was a 10-person shop. Now, if I take over the business, I don't necessarily want those two family members in the business. And when I came across those types of situations, I was a little bit more hesitant. And if I came across any hesitancy in myself going through this process, I typically would just cut ties at that point, saying, well, this isn't a right fit for myself. If I've got any concern or risk around it that I'm seeing, this isn't it.
So you hit on really a key point here, Phil, with the elevator pitch. Many buyers will approach the initial buyer-seller meeting as the seller having to convince them that it's the right business for them. And I can't tell you how often that will turn the conversation really sour. So important as a buyer to go into these initial meetings, trying to create a rapport and a trust between you and the seller. Get their attention, let them know that you're a real buyer, and it will create a much smoother process later on, especially if in your deal you wind up having issues. If the buyer and the seller both really have gotten to like each other and there's a good rapport, you can usually overcome those issues. And if not, deals usually die there.
Yeah, and I'd add on to that uh, a lot of the sellers, at least the ones that I came across, they're baby boomers, and they started these businesses when they were in their 20s or 30s or whatever it might be. But these are their babies, right? And they don't care necessarily how deep your pocket is. They want to make sure that you can take care of their baby. And that's where I think it's most important, right? In that elevator pitch, to say, hey, here's who I am. Here, I'm a person. I'm going to care about your business, and I'm going to respect it. And we're going to fix things that need to be fixed. But if things work, I'm not going to change it. And that was kind of the approach that we took.
Yeah, very good. That's excellent. On the 12 that you looked at before Sizzle, did you go down the path with any of them? Did you get to letter of intent stage with any of them, or to diligence?
Yeah, I did. We submitted a letter of intent on one business. We kind of went back and forth on that a little bit, and it ended up fizzling out. The seller tried to push my hand a little bit further than he said. He had a cash offer come in half of or double what I had offered, and I was looking to do financing. And I think that was maybe him just trying to get a little bit more out of the deal. But I had given him my best offer up front, and I wasn't going to play that game. And in the end, it's funny. I mean, I think people say this all the time, right? Like, in the end, that one didn't work out. And I think that's for the best. It wasn't the best fit for us. We wanted to do this together, Ashley and me, as a team. And I was making a concession on that transaction that I was going to be taking over that business by myself. Ashley was going to stay in her current role, and I was going to run that business because there wasn't enough cash in the business to sustain both of us. And so we ended up walking away from that one. And then 2 months later, just, exercise some patience. And 2 months later, we came across Sizzle, and it was the deal we had been looking for.
Yeah, Phil, you gave the M&A Unplugged audience another key nugget, which is if you're in the market and you're trying to make an acquisition, your ability to walk away from a deal when it just doesn't make sense for you is so key. And sometimes people get so caught up in trying to get an acquisition done that they lose sight of what their original criteria were and what was really important to them. So kudos to you for sticking to your guns and walking away. And it's all worked out in the end. So let's move over to the Sizzle transaction. So you find Sizzle, amazing, another husband and wife team. Were running it for many, many years. You come along. They were so grateful. They loved the fact that their business could potentially transfer to another husband and wife team, and so they were really excited to have you. But talk about that process for you. How did that process go? Were there surprises along the way, good or bad, things that you had to overcome? Talk a little bit about what you and Ashley went through.
Sure. So I start at the beginning of this, where we saw that initial flyer saying, hey, here's an opportunity for a home staging business. I picked up the phone. We had been working with Sun Acquisitions on the buy side, pursuing these different 12 businesses I had that we just talked about. And I called up everybody I knew at Sun Acquisitions and said, I need to get a meeting with these people, because a lot of times, as you're very well familiar, Dominic, right? It's a good opportunity. They're going to get calls left, right, and center all day long. And it's hard to make sure that you get on that short list that actually gets to meet with them. So that was my number one priority that day when I saw that was I need to make sure I get a meeting lined up with these people. When we got that meeting lined up, Ashley said, why don't you go to the meeting yourself? And I looked at her and I said, Ashley, this is a husband-wife duo. We need to present ourselves as the team we are. And so it's very important that you and I both go to this. And I think that was a critical decision at that point, because when we got in front of the sellers, we mirrored them just about 20, 30 years younger. And I think that made them relate to us, as you mentioned earlier in this, right? It made them relate to us and understand who we were, and that we were sincere, and that we were a husband-wife duo, and we wanted to take over the business and just run it the way they had been doing it. And And then further down the line, I think since we built up the rapport with them and the credibility, there had been some small things that had come up, concerns. I think there were some things around their tax structure, and we made accommodations. They made accommodations, and it was a very cordial relationship between the two of us that, there weren't really any tense moments, I would say. And that was very huge. And I think rare maybe in the transaction.
It is, but you took the right move at the start. You built the rapport. You took the time for them to get to know you, and vice versa. And it, like you said, you hit a bump in the road, but you had that foundation. So how about diligence? So you got to an accepted offer after a short negotiation. You enter diligence. You come from an M&A background, so this is not unusual for you. What was your experience like in the diligence phase?
So for myself, this was diligence. While I've got a lot of background in diligence and I would run operational and financial due diligences for large corporations, I had to pare that back significantly, right? I mean, my typical diligence request list is like 300 line items. This one, I think I ended up submitting to Joe Beers for the initial discussions with the sellers was maybe 100 line items. And I still think that was too much. And we ended up paring that back a little bit more along the way. But so I had my playbook I rolled out. It was really focused on kind of really understanding the ins and outs of the business, any liabilities or things I need to be thinking about in the future, any potential capital expenditures that might offset my cash flows throughout the upcoming years, understanding the revenue streams, the relationships. I mean, this is a home staging business where we work hand in hand with realtors. And so understanding if one, these realtors are going to still continue to call us, and then two, how strong are those relationships between the realtors and the sellers? I mean, I think Ashley and I both would say that our biggest concern was that day one on this transaction, we were going to find that maybe those relationships were much stronger than we had expected. Our book of business would just disappear because the owners had disappeared. That wasn't the case, but that was our biggest concern.
Makes perfect sense. So generally speaking, high level diligence went pretty smoothly though for you?
Diligence went pretty smoothly. I mean, there was challenging with the sellers had the business set up under two different legal entities, and so I had to do quite a bit of legwork in taking their two different P&Ls and their balance sheets and pairing them together so that I can present it to the bank and tell them, hey, here's how you should really be thinking about this business from a profitability standpoint. Because without that legwork I did, the banks weren't understanding what was going on between the two businesses.
Yeah, and I think you really highlighted something that's so important. These smaller and lower middle market companies are not run like Fortune 100s or large cap companies. They don't have even in many times reviewed financials, let alone audited financials, and so taking a big business approach to a small or lower middle market transaction is a mistake. So the fact that you pared back your expectations, but still, applying the proper discipline to make sure that, everything was there that the sellers promised was, I think, really very smart on your part, and I think led to a much easier transaction than you would have experienced had you come in with a 350-point checklist, which probably in this case, 200 of them wouldn't have applied anyway, and it would have just been overwhelming for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point you make there. Deal fatigue is a real thing, right? And making sure that we're not overwhelming the sellers who have to run a business still was a huge thing that we try to focus on. So, we would push certain questions on our data request list or in the diligence list that we said early on, like, here are the most important ones. But then once we got those back, we would then maybe push another few their way, or we take a couple off our list, but we wouldn't expect them to deliver on all, 90 or 100 requests that we had up front.
Yeah. One of the things that I oftentimes see when a very large, sophisticated buyer comes in to look at a lower middle market company is, they'll start asking for things that the owners have never produced in 20, 30, 40 years, like, 5-year forecasts. In most cases, there's no forecast. So asking somebody to, develop a forecast when they've never done it before, they don't have the expertise internally, is is a sure way to just bring the deal to, a screeching halt. It just, if it doesn't exist. Now, that's not to say that the buyer shouldn't maybe build their own model once they get enough information, but to ask the seller to do something that they haven't, ever done and don't have the expertise around is really a big mistake in that regard.
Right, right. And in that case, I think the proper thing for the seller or for the buyer to ask is, what are your expected headwinds in the business? What are potential risks are down the line? What upsides are down the line? What are you expecting? And that's more of a conversation that you can have over the phone instead of asking the sellers to document something in a detailed Excel sheet that's going to take them 2 days, if not forever, to pull together.
Yeah, that's a practical approach, logical approach to the alternative. So, Phil, as we wrap up here, looking back on your experience here, you and Ashley, what advice would you offer to first-time business owners? Whether they be individuals or investor groups or other husband and wife teams. What would you tell people are the top, one or two things that they should pay attention to?
I think understanding, having realistic expectations as to what will be required from a cash flow perspective is important. So cash flow is most important. Cash is king. That's the top thing to be looking at a business. Second, after that, if you're like myself, I was looking for low multiplier businesses. And what I mean by that is a business that is not going to cost that the cash flows aren't that expensive. So I was looking at, as for lack of better terms, I was looking for non-sexy businesses. So ones, I was talking with people that were in the steel industry, and I was talking with other just like window washing crews. And I was trying to understand kind of what was out there in these different realms that weren't necessarily being targeted by the investors that are looking to spend top dollar and that want to be in the sexy stuff. And I think those two criteria up front, if you can focus on those, that will help you find a deal that is going to be a great return on investment.
Phil, that's great advice. And again, I'm so happy for you and Ashley that you found this great business. It's going well, and I think the prospects look really, really great for the two of you. If anybody out there in the M&A Unplugged community has a need for home staging, and it's not just residential, it's commercial as well, how would they get in touch with you?
Sure. Yeah. Our phone number, they give me a call personally at 630-319-9600, or email us at contact@Sizzle, that's SIZZLE, homestaging.com.
Great. Phil, thank you so much for being here today. Really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dominic. It's always a pleasure to speak about what we've done and how you guys helped us, and pass on the knowledge that I've got and gathered through this process.
Thank you. So M&A Unplugged community, let me just summarize a few key points, some of them that we've heard before from other folks. Make sure you have your criteria set up front before you go out to make a search, and knowing the things that you don't want are just as important as the things that you do want. You heard from Phil that he and Ashley actually looked at almost a dozen businesses before they found the one that was right for them. And it's so important, especially if you're a first-time buyer and you're not a strategic and you're not looking for an add-on, that you go out and look at a lot of businesses, and that will help you inform your decision so that when you do see the right one, you'll really know it and you won't waste any time. For any of our listeners out there who are husband and wife teams, you heard Phil talk about setting some ground rules up front. Don't talk shop at home, division of labor, know who's good at what, and then stick to those things and don't bleed into the other person's roles and responsibilities. Phil also offered up a great nugget around have an elevator pitch pre-prepared before you go in and start meeting with sellers. It's so important that the sellers have confidence that you're really a motivated buyer, that you know what you want, that you're serious. And it's a great way for them to really look across the table, respect you, and it is the foundation to build rapport. And lastly, as a buyer, your ultimate strength and leverage in any deal is your willingness and your ability to walk away when you know something is just not right. If your gut is telling you something's not right, you have to listen to it. Maybe you have to get a little more information, but don't just gloss over things that are really important to you. So I want to again thank Phil for joining us today and sharing his journey along with Ashley's journey. And all of today's information is available in the show notes. If you would like to learn more about the process of acquiring or selling a business, please visit our website at sunacquisitions.com. That's SUN acquisitions.com. Or feel free to reach out to me at drinaldi@sunacquisitions.com. I look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of the M&A Unplugged podcast. And until then, please remember that scaling, acquiring, or selling a business takes time, preparation, and the proper knowledge.
Thank you for joining us today on M&A Unplugged. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and recommend it wherever you get your podcasts. If you want more great information on how to scale, acquire, or sell a business, please visit our website at sunacquisitions.com.